I am live.
Elements of culture development of culture around the world. Module 7, Module 8, Module 9, Module 10, Cultural Variation. Sociology at work, Peace Corps volunteer. Looking ahead.
Oh my
In this
god.
chapter, we will see just how basic the study of culture is to sociology. Our discussion will focus both on general cultural practices found in all societies and on the wide variety. Chapter 3, Culture.
Didn't even read this.
Module outline.
Jesus Christ.
What is culture? Cultural unit. Low 71, what is culture? Culture is the totality of learned, socially transmitted customs, knowledge, material objects, and behavior. It includes the ideas, values, and artifacts, for example, DVDs, comic books, and birth control devices, of groups of people. Patriotic attachment to the flag of the United States is an aspect of culture, as is a national passion for the tango in Argentina. Sometimes people refer to a particular person as very cultured or to a city as having lots of culture. That use of the term culture is different from our use in this textbook. In sociological terms, culture does not refer solely to the fine arts and refined intellectual taste. It consists of all objects and ideas within a society, including slang words, ice cream cones, and rock music. Sociologists consider both the portrait by Rembrandt and the work of graffiti spray painters to be aspects of culture. A tribe that cultivates soil by hand has just as much culture as a people that relies on computer-operated machinery. Each people has a distinctive culture with its own characteristic ways of gathering and preparing food, constructing homes, structuring the family, and promoting standards of right and wrong. The fact that you share a similar culture with others helps you define the group or society to which you belong. A fairly large number of people are said to constitute a society when they live in the same territory, are relatively independent of people outside their area, and participate in a common culture. Metropolitan Los Angeles is more populous than at least 150 nations, yet sociologists do not consider it a society in its own right. Rather, they see it as part of and dependent on the larger society of the United States. A society is the largest form of human group. It consists of people who share a common heritage and culture. Members of the society learn this culture and transmit it from one generation to the next. They even preserve their distinctive culture through literature, art, video recordings, and other means of expression. Cultural practices vary across societies. In China, married couples rarely wear wedding rings. To signify their commitment, couples who appear in public often sport matching or complementary outfits. Module 7, the study of culture 59. 60 CHAPTERTHRE culture. Sociologists have long recognized the many ways in which culture influences human behavior. Through what has been termed a toolkit of habits, skills, and styles, people of a common culture construct their acquisition of knowledge, their interactions with kinfolk, their entrance into the job market, in short, the way in which they live. If it were not for the social transmission of culture, each generation would have to reinvent television, not to mention the wheel. Swigler, 1986. Having a common culture also simplifies many day-to-day interactions. For example, when you buy an airline ticket, you know you don't have to bring along hundreds of dollars in cash. You can pay with a credit card. When you are part of a society, you take for granted many small, as well as more important, cultural patterns. You assume that theaters will provide seats for the audience, that physicians will not disclose confidential information, and that parents will be careful when crossing the street with young children. All these assumptions reflect basic values, beliefs, and customs of the culture of the United States. Today, when text, sound, and video can be transmitted around the world instantaneously, some aspects of culture transcend national borders. The German philosopher Theodor Adorno and others have spoken of the worldwide culture industry that standardizes the goods and services demanded by consumers. Adorno contends that globally, the primary effect of popular culture is to limit people's choices. Yet others have shown that the culture industry's influence does not always permeate international borders. Sometimes the culture industry is embraced, at other times, soundly rejected. Adorno 1971, 1991, 98, 106, Horkheimer and Adorno 1944, 2002. Cultural universals. All societies have developed certain common practices and beliefs, known as cultural universals. Many cultural universals are, in fact, adaptations to meet essential human needs, such as the need for food, shelter, and clothing. Anthropologist George Murdoch, 1945:124, compiled a list of cultural universals, including athletic sports, cooking, banking, visiting, personal names, marriage, medicine, religious ritual, funeral ceremonies, sex UAL restrictions, and trade. The cultural practices Murdoch listed may be universal, but the manner in which they are expressed varies from culture to culture. For example, one society may let its members choose their marriage partners, another may encourage marriage arranged by the parents. Not only does the expression of cultural universals vary from one society to another, within a society, it may also change dramatically over time. Each generation, and each year for that matter, most human cultures change and expand. Low 72 ethnocentrism. Many everyday statements reflect our attitude that our culture is best. We use terms such as underdeveloped, backward, and primitive to refer to other societies. What we believe is a religion, what they believe is superstition and mythology. It is tempting to evaluate the practices of other cultures on the basis of our perspectives. Sociologist William Graham Sumner, 1906, coined the term ethnocentrism to refer to the tendency to assume that one's own culture and way of life represent the norm or are superior to all others. The ethnocentric person sees his or her group as the center or defining point of culture and views all other cultures as deviations from what is normal. Westerners who think cattle are to be used for food might look down on India's Hindu religion and culture, which view the cow as sacred. For people in one culture, it is just as unthinkable to maid selection or child rearing practices of another culture. In sum, our view of the world is dramatically influenced by the society in which we were raised. Ethnocentrism is hardly limited to citizens of the United States. Visitors from many African cultures are surprised at the disrespect that children in the United States show their parents. People from India may be repelled by our practice of living in the same household with dogs and cats. Many Islamic fundamentalists in the Arab world and Asia view the United States as corrupt, decadent, and doomed to destruction. All these people may feel comforted by membership in cultures that in their view are superior to ours. From the perspective of a classroom paraprofessional, how would it benefit the students of a multi-ethnic, multiracial urban school if the teaching staff evaluated student behaviors from the viewpoint of cultural relativism rather than ethnocentrism? Low 72 cultural relativism. While ethnocentrism means evaluating foreign cultures using the familiar culture of the observer as a standard of correct behavior, cultural relativism means viewing people's behavior from the perspective of their own culture. It places a priority on understanding other cultures, rather than dismissing them as strange or exotic. Unlike ethnocentrists, cultural relativists employ the kind of value neutrality in scientific study that Max Weber saw as so important. Cultural relativism stresses that different social contexts give rise to different norms and values. Thus, we must examine practices such as polygamy, bullfighting, and modern child within the particular contexts of the cultures in which they are found. Although cultural relativism does not suggest that we must unquestionably accept every cultural variation, it does require a serious and unbiased effort to evaluate norms, values, and customs in light of their distinctive culture. Consider the practice of children marrying adults. Most people in North America cannot fathom the idea of a 12-year-old girl marriage. The custom, which is illegal in the United States, is common in West Africa and South Asia. Should the United States respect such marriages? The apparent answer is no. In 2006, the U.S. government spent $623 million to discourage the practice in many of the countries with the highest child marriage rates, figure 3 to 1. From the perspective of cultural relativism, we might ask whether one society should spend its resources to dictate the norms of another. However, federal officials have defended the government's actions. They contend that child marriage deprives girls of EDU, threatens their health, and weakens public health efforts to combat HIV/AIDS. Jane and Cruz 2007, B. Slav 2007. Low 7 to 3 Sociobiology and Culture. While sociology emphasizes diversity and change in the expression of culture, another school of thought, sociobiology, stresses the universal aspects of culture. Sociobiology is a systematic study of how biology affects human social behavior. Sociobiologists assert that many of the cultural traits humans display, such as the almost universal expectation that women will be nurturers and men will be providers, are not learned but are rooted in our genetic makeup. Sociobiology is founded on the naturalist Charles Darwin's 1859 theory of evolution. In traveling the world, Darwin had noted small variations in species in the shape of bird feet, for example, from one location to another. He theorized that over hundreds of generations, random variations in genetic makeup had helped certain members of a species to survive in a particular environment. A bird with a differently shaped beak might have been better at gathering seeds than other birds, for instance. In reproducing, these lucky individuals had passed on their advantageous genes to succeeding generations. Module 7. The study of culture 61. Mapping life worldwide. Figure 3 to 1 countries with high child marriage rates. Niger. Dominican Mali Republic Burkina. Faso Guinea. Sociobiologists apply Darwin's principle of eventually, given their advantage in survival, individuals with the variation began to outnumber other members of the species. The species was slowly adapting to its environment. Darwin called this process of adaptation to the environment through random genetic variation natural selection. Sociobiologists apply Darwin's principle of natural selection to the study of social behavior. They assume that particular forms of behavior become genetically linked to a species if they contribute to its fitness to survive. Van den Berg 1978. In its extreme form, sociobiology suggests that all behavior is the result of genetic or biological factors, and that social interactions play no role in shaping people's conduct. Sociobiologists do not seek to describe individual behavior on the level of why is Fred more aggressive than Jim. Rather, they focus on how human nature is affected by the genetic composition of a group of people who share certain characteristics, such as men or women, or members of isolated tribal bands. In general, sociobiologists have stressed the basic genetic heritage that all humans share and have shown little interest in speculating about alleged differences between racial groups or nationalities. A few researchers have tried to trace specific behaviors, like criminal activity, to certain genetic markers, but those markers are not deterministic. Family cohesiveness, peer group behavior, and other social factors can override genetic influences on behavior. GUOETAL 2008, E. Wilson 1975, 1978. Certainly most social scientists would agree that there is a biological basis for social behavior. Like interactionists, however, conflict theorists and functionalists believe that people's behavior rather than their genetic structure defines social reality. Conflict theorists. Uganda. 62C. Fear that the sociobiological approach could be used as an argument against efforts to assist disadvantaged people, such as school children who are not competing successfully. Priest 2008, Mahalik and Martin 2010, E. Wilson 2000. Read each question carefully and then select or provide the best answer. One which of the following is an
One is D. 2 is C. Okay. 3 is A. 4 is V. Whatever. Cultural relativism, the viewing people's behavior from from the perspective of their own culture, a common practice or belief found in every culture. The totality of learned socially transitive systems, the worldwide media industry that standardized the goods and services demanded by consumers, the tendency to assume that one's own culture and way of life represent the norm. Whatever.
sociological perspectives on cult. 64. Cult. A. Minus 1. A. 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 A.
Oh my God.
Module 8 elements of culture learning objectives. Low 8 to 1 define language and describe its influence on culture. Low 8 to 2 distinguish. Module outline. Norms and values norms. 64. Chapter 3. Culture. 8. -1. 8. 8.
Language is one of the major elements of culture. Cultural capital. Common language. You share the same cultural term. If you're in England, you need for an electric torch. Pot. Intoxicating drug. 7,000 languages.
Drugs, making killing on the stock market, and bombing an examination, something monumental or great as a bomb. An observer from an entirely different and wordless culture could gauge the importance that war and the military have had in our lives simply by recognizing the prominence that militaristic terms have in our language. Similarly, the Sami people of northern Norway and Sweden have a rich diversity of terms for snow, ice, and reindeer. Haviland DTAL 2008, MAGA 2006. Language is, in fact, the foundation of every culture. Language is an abstract system of word meanings and symbols for all aspects of culture. It includes speech, written characters, numerals, symbols, and nonverbal gestures and expressions. Because language is the foundation of every culture, the ability to speak other languages is crucial to intercultural relations. Throughout the Cold War era, beginning in the 1950s and continuing well into the 1970s, the U.S. government encouraged the study of Russian by developing special language schools for diplomat and military advisors who dealt with the Soviet Union. And following September 11, 2001, the nation recognized how few skilled translators it had for Arabic and other languages as few can in Muslim countries. Language quickly became key not only to tracking potential terrorists, but also to building diplomatic bridges with Muslim countries willing to help in the war against terrorism. Language does more than simply describe reality, it also serves to shape the reality of culture. For example, most people in the United States cannot easily make the verbal distinctions concerning snow and ice that are possible in the Sami culture. As a result, they are less likely to notice such differences. The Sapir Whorf hypothesis, named for two linguists, describes the role of language in shaping our interpretation of reality. According to Sapir and Whorf, because people can conceptualize the world only through language, language precedes thought. Thus, the word symbols and grammar of a language organize the world for us. The Sapir Whorf hypothesis also holds that language is not given. Rather, it is culturally determined, and it encourages a distinctive interpretation of reality by focusing our attention on certain phenomena. Sapir 1929. For decades, the Navajo have referred to cancer as Landu and AGI. Now, through a project funded by the National Cancer Institute, the tribal college is seeking to change the phrase. What? Literally, the phrase means the sword that does not heal, and health educators are concerned that tribal members who have been diagnosed with cancer view it as a death sentence. Their effort to change the Navajo language, not easy in itself, is complicated by the Navajo belief that to talk about the disease is to bring it on one's people. Fonseca 2008. Similarly, feminist theorists have noted that gender-related language can reflect, although in itself it does not determine the traditional acceptance of men and women in certain occupations. Each time we use a term such as mailman, policeman, or fireman, we are implying, especially to young children, that these occupations can be filled only by males. Yet many women work as mail carriers, police officers, and firefighters, a fact that is being increasingly recognized and legitimized through the use of such non-sexist language. Language can shape how we see, taste, smell, feel, and hear. It also influences the way we think about the people, ideas, and objects around us. Language communicates a culture's most important norms, values, and sanctions. That's why the decline of an old language or the introduction of a new one is such a sensitive issue in many parts of the world. See the social policy section at the end of this chapter. A native speaker trains instructors from the Oneida Nation of New York in the Berlitz method of language teaching. As of 2012, there were 527 speakers of the Oneida language. Many Native American tribes are taking similar steps to recover their seldom used languages, realizing that language is the essential foundation of any culture. Using American Sign Language, a form of nonverbal communication, a football coach discusses playing with his team. The Silent Warriors, four-time national champions and the pride of the Alabama School for the Deaf, have defeated both hearing and non-hearing teams. Nonverbal communication. If you don't like the way a meeting is going, you might suddenly sit back, fold your arms, and turn down the corners of your mouth. When you see a friend in tears, you may give a quick hug. After winning a big game, you probably high-five your teammates. These are all examples of nonverbal communication, the use of gestures, facial expressions, and other visual images to communicate. We are not born with these expressions. We learn them, just as we learn other forms of language, from people who share our same culture. This statement is as true for the basic expressions of happiness and sadness as it is for more complex emotions, such as shame or distress. Fridlund DTAL 1987. 66 CHAPTERTHRE culture. Like other forms of language, nonverbal communication is not the same in all cultures. For example, sociological research done at the micro-level documents that people from various cultures differ in the degree to which they touch others during the course of normal social interactions. Even experienced travelers are sometimes caught off guard by these differences. In Saudi Arabia, a middle-aged man may want to hold hands with a partner after closing a business deal. In Egypt, men walk hand in hand in the street. In cafes, they fall asleep while hugging in each other's arms. These gestures, which would shock an American businessman, are considered compliments in those cultures. The meaning of hand signals is another form of nonverbal communication that can differ from one culture to the next. In Australia, the thumbs up sign is considered rude. Passero 2002, Vaughn 2007. A related form of communication is the use of symbols to convey meaning to others. Symbols are the gestures, objects, and words that form the basis of human communication. The thumbs up gesture, the gold star sticker, and the smiley face in an email are all symbols. Often deceptively simple, many symbols are rich in meaning and may not convey the same meaning in all social contexts. Around someone's neck, for example, a cross can symbolize religious reverence, over a gravesite, a belief in everlasting life.
Why is a thumbs up in Asia considered rude? Well, liar then. Somebody's liar.
Lie or set in flames, racial hatred. Loyalty to norms and values. Wash your hands before dinner. Thou shalt not kill. Respect your elders. All societies have ways of encouraging and enforcing what they view as appropriate behavior while discouraging and punishing what they consider to be inappropriate behavior. They also have a collective idea of what is good and desirable in life or not. In this section, we will learn to distinguish between the closely related concepts of norms and values. Norms. Norms are the established standards of behavior maintained by society. For a norm to become significant, it must be widely shared and understood. For example, in movie theaters in the United States, we typically expect that people will be quiet while the film is shown. Of course, the application of this norm can vary, depending on the particular film and type of audience. People who are viewing a serious artistic film will be more likely to insist on the norm of silence than those who are watching a slapstick comedy or horror movie. One persistent social norm in contemporary society is that of heterosexuality. As sociologists, and queer theorists especially, note, children are socialized to accept this norm from a very young age. Overwhelmingly, parents describe adult romantic relationships to their children exclusively as heterosexual relationships. That is not necessarily because they consider same-sex relationships unacceptable, but more likely because they see heterosexuality as the norm in marital partnerships. According to a national survey of mothers of 3 to 6-year-olds, 1 in 5 mothers teaches her young children that homosexuality is wrong. The same survey showed that parenting reflects the dominant ideology, in which homosexuality is treated as a rare exception. Most parents assume that their children are heterosexual. Only 1 in 4 has even considered whether his or her child might grow up to be gay or lesbian. Kmart in 2009. Types of norms. Sociologists distinguish between norms in 2 ways. First, norms are classified as either formal or informal. Formal norms generally have been written down and specify strict punishments for violators. In the United States, we often formalize norms into laws, which are very precise in defining proper and improper behavior. Sociologist Donald Black, 1995, has termed law governmental social control, meaning that laws are formal norms enforced by the state. Laws are just one example of formal norms. Parking restrictions and rules of a football or basketball game are also considered formal norms. In contrast, informal norms are generally understood but not precisely reported. Standards of proper dress are a common example of informal norms. Our society has no specific punishment or sanction for a person who shows up at school or work wearing inappropriate clothing. Laughter is usually the most likely response. Norms are also classified by their relative importance to society. When classified in this way, they are known as mores and folkways. Mores, pronounced morais, are norms deemed highly necessary to the welfare of the society, often because they embody the most cherished principles of people. Each society demands obedience to its mores. Violation can lead to severe penalties. Thus, the United States has strong mores against murder, treason, and child abuse, which have been institutionalized into formal norms. Folkways are norms governing everyday behavior. Folkways play an important role in shaping the daily behavior of members of culture. Society is less likely to formalize folkways than mores, and their violation raises comparatively little concern. For example, walking up and down escalator in a department store challenges our standards of appropriate behavior, but it will not result in a fine or a jail sentence. Norms and sanctions. Suppose a football coach sends 12 players instead of 11 onto a field. Imagine a college graduate showing up in shorts for a job interview at a large bank. Or consider a driver who doesn't put money in the parking meter. These people have violated widely shared and understood norms. So what happens? In each of these situations, the person will receive sanctions if his or her behavior is detected. Sanctions are penalties and rewards for conduct concerning a social norm. Note that the concept of reward is included in this definition. Conformity to a norm can lead to positive sanctions such as a pay raise, a medal, a word of gratitude, or a pat on the back. Negative sanctions include fines, threats, imprisonment, and scares of contempt. Table 3-1 summarizes the relationship between norms and sanctions. As you can see, the sanctions that are associated with formal norms, which are written down and codified, tend to be formal as well. If a college football coach sends too many players onto the field, the team will be penalized 15 yards. The driver who fails to put money in the parking meter will receive a ticket and have to pay a fine. But sanctions for violations of informal norms can vary. The college graduate who goes to the bank interview in shorts will probably lose any chance of getting the job. On the other hand, he or she might be so brilliant that bank officials will overlook the unconventional attire. Module 8. Elements of Culture 67. The entire fabric of norms and sanctions in culture reflects the culture's values and priorities. The most cherished values will be most heavily sanctioned. Matters regarded as less critical will carry light and informal sanctions. Acceptance of norms. People do not follow norms, whether formal or informal, in all situations. In some cases, they can obey the norm because they know it is weakly enforced. It is illegal for U.S. teenagers to drink alcoholic beverages, yet drinking by minors is common throughout the nation. In fact, teenage alcoholism is a serious social problem. In some instances, behavior that appears to violate society's norms may actually represent adherence to the norms of a particular group. Teenage drinkers are conforming to the standards of their peer group when they violate norms that condemn underage drinking. Similarly, business executives who use shady accounting techniques may be responding to a corporate culture that demands the maximization of profits at any cost, including the deception of investors and government regulatory agencies. Norms are violated in some instances because one norm conflicts with another. For example, suppose that you live in an apartment building and one night hear the screams of the woman next door, who is being beaten by her husband. If you decide to intervene by ringing their doorbell or calling the police, you are violating the norm of minding your own business, while following the norm of assisting a victim of violence. Acceptance of norms is subject to changes as the political, economic, and social conditions of culture are transformed. Until the 1960s, for example, formal norms throughout much of the United States prohibited the marriage of people from different racial groups. Over the past half-century, however, such legal prohibitions have been cast aside. The process of change can be seen today in the increasing acceptance of single parents and growing support for the legalization of same-sex marriage, when circumstances require the sudden violation of long-standing cultural norms. The change can upset an entire population. In Iraq, where Muslim custom strictly forbids touching by strangers for men and especially for women, a war that began in 2003 brought numerous daily violations of the norm. Outside important mosques, government offices, and other facilities likely to be targeted by terrorists, visitors had to be patted down and have their bags searched by Iraqi security guards. To reduce the discomfort caused by the procedure, women were searched by female guards and men by male guards. Despite that concession, and the fact that many Iraqis admitted or even insisted on the need for such measures, people still winced at the invasion of their personal privacy. In reaction to the searches, Iraqi women began to look at the contents of the bags they carried or simply left them at home. Rubin 2003. Values. Though we each have a personal set of values which may include character, fitness, or success in business, we also share a general set of values as members of a society. Cultural values are these collective conceptions of what is considered good, desirable, and proper or bad, undesirable, and improper in culture. They indicate what people in a given culture prefer as well as what they find important and morally right or wrong. Values may be specific, such as honoring one's parents and owning a home, or they may be more general, such as health, love, and democracy. Of course, the members of a society do not uniformly share its values. Angry political debates and billboards promoting conflicting causes tell us that much. Values influence people's behavior and serve as criteria for evaluating the actions of others. The values, norms, and sanctions of culture. Table 3-1. Norms and sanctions. Sanctions. Norms. Positive. Negative. Formal. Are often directly related. For example, if a culture places a high value on the institution of marriage, it may have norms and strict sanctions that prohibit the act of adultery or make divorce difficult. If a culture views private property as a basic value, it will probably have strict laws against theft and vandalism. The values of a culture may change, but most remain relatively stable during any one person's lifetime. Socially shared, intensely felt values are a fundamental part of our lives in the United States. Sociologist Robin Williams, 1970, has offered a list of basic values. It includes achievement, efficiency, material comfort, nationalism, equality, and the supremacy of science and reason over faith. Obviously, not all 320 million people in this country agree on all these values, but such a list serves as a starting point in defining the national character. Each year, more than 200,000 entering college students at nearly 300 of the nation's four-year colleges fill out a questionnaire about their values. Because this survey focuses on an array of issues, beliefs, and life goals, it is commonly cited as a barometer of the nation's values. The respondents are asked what values are personally important to them. Over the past half-century, the value of being very well off financially has shown the strongest gain in popularity. The proportion of first-year college students who endorse this value as essential or very important rose from 42% in 1966 to 81% in 2012, figure 3-2. During the 1980s and 1990s, support for values having to do with money, power, and status grew. At the same time, support for certain values having to do with social awareness and altruism, such as helping others, declined. According to the 2011 nationwide survey, only 42% of first-year college students stated that influencing social values was an essential or very important goal. The proportion of students for whom helping to promote racial understanding was an essential or very important goal reached a record high of 46% in 1992 and fell to 35.3% in 2012. Like other aspects of culture, such as language and norms, a nation's values are not necessarily fixed. Study alert. Remember that norms are society's established expectations for typical behavior in varying situations, whereas values are the commonly held beliefs about what is considered proper or moral and improper or immoral behavior in culture. Whether the slogan is think green or reduce your carbon footprint, students have been exposed to values associated with environmentalism. How many of them accept those values? Poll results over the past 40 years show fluctuations, with a high of nearly 46% of students indicating a desire to become involved in cleaning up the environment. By the 1980s, however, student support for embracing this objective had dropped to around 20% or even lower. Figure 3-2. Even with recent attention to global warming, the proportion remains level at only 26.5% of first-year students in 2012. Figure 3-2 life goals of first-year college students in the United States, 1966 to 2012. Values can also differ in subtle ways not just among individuals and groups, but from one culture to another. For example, in Japan, young children spend long hours working with tutors, preparing for entrance exams required for admission to selective schools. No stigma is attached to these services, known as cram schools. In fact, they are highly valued. Yet in South Korea, people have begun to complain that cram schools give affluent students an unfair advantage. Since 2008, the South Korean government has regulated the after-school tutoring industry, limiting its hours and imposing fees on the schools. Some think this policy has lowered their society's expectations of students, describing it as an attempt to make South Koreans more American. Ramsey 2011, Ripley 2011. Another example of cultural differences in values is public opinion regarding the treatment of different racial and ethnic groups. As figure 3-3 shows, opinion on the need for equal treatment of different racial and ethnic groups varies dramatically from one country to another. 190, 80, 70, 60, 50, 40, 30, 20, 10, 0. Develop a meaningful philosophy of life. Be very well off financially. Figure 3 to 3. Value. Low 8 to 3 global. Culture war. For almost a generation, public attention in the United States has focused on culture war, or the polarization of society over controversial cultural elements. Originally, in the 1990s, the term referred to political debates over heated issues such as abortion, religious expression, gun control, and sexual orientation. Soon, however, it took on a global meaning, especially after September 11, as Americans won their "Why do they hate us?" Through 2000, global studies of public opinion have reported favorable views of the United States in countries as diverse as Morocco and Germany. But after the United States established a military presence in Iraq and Afghanistan, foreign opinion of Mexico, China, Kenya, 80%, 79%. 2004, S. Schwartz and Barty 2001. Despite this effort, the United States became quite negative. J. Hunter 1991, Golan EPAL 2005, 2007. In the past 30 years, extensive efforts have been made to compare values in different nations, recognizing the challenges in interpreting value concepts in a similar manner across cultures. Psychologist John Schwartz has measured values in more than 60 count trials. Around the world, certain values are widely shared, including benevolence, which is defined as forgiveness and loyalty. In contrast, power, defined as control or dominance over people and resources, is a value that is endorsed much less often. Hitler and Pilates. 2004, S. Schwartz and Barty 2001. Despite this evidence of shared values, some scholars have interpreted terrorism, genocide, wars, and military occupations of the early 21st century as a clash of civilizations. According to this thesis, cultural and religious identities, rather than national or political loyalties, are becoming the prime source of international conflict. Critics of this thesis point out that conflict over values is nothing new, only our ability to create havoc and violence has grown. Furthermore, speaking of clash of civilizations disguises the sharp divisions that exist within large groups. Christianity, for example, runs the gamut from Quaker-style pacifism to certain elements of the Ku Klux Klan's ideology. Berman 2003, Huntington 1993, said 2001. Low 8 to 4 sociological perspectives on culture. Functionalists and conflict theorists agree that culture and society are mutually supportive, but for different reasons. Functionalists maintain that social stability requires a consensus and the support of society's members. Strong central values and common norms provide that support. This view of culture became popular in sociology beginning in the 1950s. It was borrowed from British anthropologists who saw cultural traits as a stabilizing element in culture. From a functionalist perspective, a cultural trait or practice will persist if it performs functions that society seems to need or contributes to overall social stability and consensus. 70 CHAPTERTHRE culture. Conflict theorists agree that common culture may exist, but they argue that it serves to maintain the privileges of certain groups. Moreover, while protecting their self-interest, powerful groups may keep others in a subservient position. The term dominant ideology describes a set of cultural beliefs and practices that helps to maintain powerful social, economic, and political interests. This concept was first used by Hungarian Marxist George Lukács, 1923, and Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci, 1929, but it did not gain an audience in the United States until the early 1970s. In Karl Marx's view, a capitalist society has a dominant ideology that serves the interests of the ruling class. Help to control women and keep them in a subordinate position. The growing number of social scientists believe that it is not easy to identify core culture in the United States. For support, they point to the lack of consensus on national values, the diffusion of cultural traits, the diversity within our culture, and the changing views of young people. Look again at figure 3 to 2. Instead, they suggest that the core culture provides the tools that people of all persuasions need to develop strategies for social change. Still, there is no denying that certain expressions of values have greater influence than others, even in as complex a society as the United States. Swiffer 1986. Read each question carefully and then select or provide the best answer. One which of the following statements is true according to the superior word hypothesis? A language simply describes reality. B language does not transmit stereotypes related to race. C language at present S. D language is not an example of cultural universal. 2. Which of the following statements about norms is correct? A. People do not follow norms in all situations, not in some cases. They evade the norm because they know it is weakly enforced. B. In some instances, behavior that appears to violate society. And these norms may actually represent adherence to the norms of a particular group. C. Norms are violated in some instances because one norm conflicts with another. D. How people are correct. 3. Which of the following statements about values is correct? A. Values never change. B.
Conflict, war, dominant ideology, folkway, formal norm, informal norm, language, law, mores, norm, sanctum, Semple-Whorf hypothesis, symbol, value.
Today, despite the preference most of us have for our own way of life, powerful forces link us to others around the world. Thus, students in the United States may study the novels of Leo Tolstoy, the art of Pablo Picasso, or the films of Ang Lee. They may listen to pop music from Nigeria or South Korea, or follow the progress of social movements in Iran, Egypt, or Syria via satellite TV and social media. In this section, we will examine two of the social processes that make these global links possible: innovation and the diffusion of culture through globalization and technology.
Oh my god, I'm bored. I'm bored. I'm bored. I'm bored. Alright, let's just get to this stupid shit. I'm a student, so do I change this now? Oh my god. What the fuck? Oh, whatever, man. Oh, dying inside. Oh, really? Oh, really? Oh, me, banana. Oh, banana. Oh, banana. Oh, do really? Oh, really? They give me some tips. I wasn't looking. Operational definition: kill yourself. What the fuck? Oh my god. I literally have to type scientific method. Ah, motherfucker. A lie. Mm. What the fuck? Oh. I like the longest answer. Bitch, I'm too lazy to read this shit. Ugh. How to develop. Is it an operational development definition? Mm. Ah! Whatever, man. Oops. Okay. Oh my god, I hate this game. Oh, I hate this game so much. Like, I'm bored. Motherfucker. King. Oh my god. I'm actually bored.
Low 91 Innovation. The process of introducing a new idea or object to a culture is known as innovation. Innovation interests sociologists because of the social consequences of introducing something new. There are two forms of innovation, discovery and invention. Discovery involves making known or sharing the existence of an aspect of reality. The finding of the structure of a DNA molecule and the identification of a new moon of Saturn are both acts of discovery. A significant factor in the process of discovery is the sharing of newfound knowledge with others. In contrast, an invention results when existing cultural items are combined into a form that did not exist before. The bow and arrow, the automobile, and the television are all examples of inventions, as are Protestantism and democracy. Low 92 Globalization, diffusion, and technology. The recent emergence of Starbucks, a worldwide chain of coffee houses, is just one illustration of a rapidly escalating trend toward globalization. While people in Asia are beginning to enjoy coffee, people in North America are discovering sushi. Some have become familiar with the bento box, a small lunchbox that is often used to serve sushi. A trademark Japanese cuisine, sushi has evolved from a once exotic dish in the United States to a mainstream food commonly found in supermarket refrigerators. Yet its move across the Pacific has changed the delicacy. Americans tend to treat sushi as a takeout or menu item. The authentic way to eat sushi is to sit at a bar and engage the chef in conversation about the day's catch. More and more cultural expressions and practices are crossing national borders and affecting the traditions and customs of the societies exposed to them. Sociologists use the term diffusion to refer to the process by which a cultural item spreads from group to group or society to society. Diffusion can occur through a variety of means, among them exploration, military conquest, missionary work, and the influence of the mass media, tourism, the internet, see Box Region 1, and a fast food restaurant. Sociologist George Ritzer coined the term McDonaldization of society to describe how the principles of fast food restaurants, developed in the United States, have come. Members of Big Toe Crew, a Vietnamese hip-hop group, rehearse for a performance. Through tourism and the mass media, music, and dance spread from one culture to another in a process called diffusion. Module 9 Development of Culture Around the World 73. Study alert. Material culture concerns the physical or technological features of our lives, food, houses, the internet, while non-material culture describes the way we use these objects, as well as our customs, beliefs, communication patterns, and type of government. Culture life occurs when material culture makes a rapid advance in which the non-material culture then struggles to adapt to dominate more and more sectors of societies throughout the world. For example, hair salons and medical clinics now take walk-ins. In Hong Kong, sex selection clinics offer a menu of items, from fertility enhancement to methods of increasing the likelihood of being a child with the desired sex. And religious groups from evangelical preachers on local stations or websites to priests at the Vatican Television Center use marketing techniques similar to those that are used to sell Happy Meals. McDonaldization is associated with the melding of cultures, through which we see more and more similarities in cultural expression. In Japan, for example, African entrepreneurs have found a thriving market for hip-hop fashions popularized by teens in the United States. Similarly, the familiar golden arches of McDonald's can be seen around the world. Yet corporations like McDonald's have had to make some adjustments of their own. Until 2001, McDonald's ran its overseas operations from corporate headquarters in suburban Chicago. After a few false starts, executives recognized the need to develop restaurants' menus and marketing strategies overseas, relying on advice from local people. Now, at over 3,700 restaurants in Japan, customers can enjoy the made tomato burger beef, bacon, and fried egg with special sauces. In India, patrons who don't eat beef can order a vegetarian grilled tiki potato burger. Because some strict vegetarians in India refuse to eat among non-vegetarians, in 2013 McDonald's began opening vegetarian-only restaurants there. Isfaro and Drake in 2012, Ritzer 2010, 2013. From the perspective of a small belly owner, what challenges does the McDonaldization of society pose for owners of small restaurants and retail shops trying to establish a market presence? Technology in its many forms has increased the speed of cultural diffusion and broadened the distribution of cultural elements. Sociologist Gerhard Lenski has defined technology as cultural information about the ways in which the material resources of the environment may be used to satisfy human needs and desires. Nolan and Lenski 2009, 357. Today's technological developments no longer await publication in journals with limited circulation. Press conferences, often carried simultaneously on the internet, trump the new developments. Technology not only accelerates the diffusion of scientific innovations but also transmits culture. The English language and North American culture dominate the internet and World Wide Web. Such control, or at least dominance, of technology influences the direction of cultural diffusion. For example, websites cover even the most superficial aspects of U.S. culture but offer little information about the pressing issues faced by people all over the world find it easier to visit electronic chat rooms about the latest reality nutrition. Sociologist William F. Otburn distinction between the elements of material and non-material culture. Material culture refers to the physical or techno food, houses, factories, and raw materials. Non-material culture refers to ways of using material objects, as well as to customs, beliefs, philosophies, governments, and patterns of communication. Generally, the non-material culture is more resistant to change than consequently, Otburn introduced the term culture life to refer to the period of maladjustment when the non-material culture is in material conditions. For example, in 2010, manufacturers introduced electronic cigarettes, battery powered that turn nicotine-laced liquid into a vapor mist. The innovation soon had officials at airlines, which banned smoking, and the Food and Drug Administration swung to respond to the latest technology. Case model in 2010, Swigler 1986. 74 Chapter 3 Culture. Sociology in the global community. Heal countries, at the expense of the poor and developed nations. They consider globalization to be a successor to the read each question.
1 is A, 2 is B, 3 is cultural shock, 4 is cultural lag.
Module 10 Cultural Variation Learning Objectives. Low 10. Module Outline. Low 10 to 1 Cultural Variation. Within societies. Despite the presence of cultural universals such as courtship and religion, great diversity exists among the world's many cultures. Inuit tribes in northern Canada, dressed in fur for the hut, share little with farmers in Southeast Asia, who dress lightly for work in their hut, human rice paddies. Cultures adapt to meet specific circumstances, such as climate, level of technology, population, and geography. Even within a single nation, certain segments of the populace develop cultural patterns that differ from the patterns of the dominant society, thus the difficulty of identifying core culture in the United States, where regional differences fuel culture wars between conservatives and liberals. Moreover, in every region, specific communities tend to band together to form their own culture within culture, called a subculture. Subcultures. Rodeo riders, residents of a retirement community, workers on an offshore oil rig, all are examples of what sociologists refer to as subcultures. A subculture is a segment of society that shares a distinctive pattern of customs, rules, and traditions that differs from the pattern of the larger society. The existence of many subcultures is characteristic of complex societies such as the United States. Members of a subculture participate in the dominant culture while engaging in unique and distinctive forms of behavior. Frequently, a subculture will develop an argot, or speechalized language that distinguishes it from the wider society. Athletes who play parkour, an extreme sport that combines forward running with fence leaping and the vaulting of walls, water barriers, and even moving cars, speak in argot they devised especially to. Module 10 Cultural Variation 77. Employees of an international call center in India socialize after their shift has ended. Call center employees, whose odd working hours isolate them from others, tend to form tight-knit subcultures. Describe their feats. Parkour runners talk about doing King Kong vaults, diving arms first over a wall or grocery cart and landing in a standing position. They may follow this maneuver with a tic-tac kicking off the wall to overcome some kind of obstacle. Kidder 2012. Such argot allows insiders, the MEMers of the subculture, to understand words with special meanings. It also establishes patterns of communication that outsiders can't understand. Sociologists associated with the interactionist perspective emphasize that language and symbols offer a powerful way for a subculture to feel cohesive and maintain its identity. In India, a new subculture has developed among employees at the international call centers established by multinational corporations. To serve customers in the United States and Europe, the young men and women who work there must be fluent speakers of English. But the corporations that employ them demand more than proficiency in a foreign language. They expect their Indian employees to adopt 78 CHAPTERTHRE culture. Western values and work habits, including the grueling pace US workers take for granted. In effect, workers at these call centers live in a state of virtual migration, not quite in India, but not in the United States either. Significantly, call centers allow employees to take the day off only on US holidays, like Labor Day and Thanksgiving, not on Indian holidays like Diwali, the Hindu festival of lights. While most Indian families are home celebrating, call center employees see only each other. When they have the day off, no one else is free to socialize with them. As a result, these employees have formed a tight-knit subculture based on hard work and a taste for Western luxury goods and leisure time for suits. ROETAL 2013. Another shared characteristic among some employees at Indian call centers is their contempt for the callers they serve. In performing their monotonous, repetitive job day after day, hundreds of thousands of these workers have come to see the faceless Americans they deal with as slow, often rude customers. Such shared understandings underpin this emerging subculture. Bobby 2007, Gentleman 2006, Patel 2010. Functionalists and conflict theorists agree that variation exists within cultures. Functionalists view subcultures as variations of particular social environments and as evidence that differences can exist within a common culture. However, conflict theorists suggest that variations often reflect the inequality of social arrangements within a society. A conflict theorist would view the challenges to dominant social norms by African American activists, the feminist movement, and the gay rights movement as reflections of inequity based on race, gender, and sexual orientation. Conflict theorists also argue that subcultures sometimes emerge when the dominant society unsuccessfully tries to suppress a practice, such as the use of illegal drugs. Table 3-2 summarizes the major sociological perspectives on culture. Countercultures. By the end of the 1960s, an extensive subculture had emerged in the United States, composed of young people turned off by a society they believed was too materialistic and technological. The group included primarily political radicals and hippies who had dropped out of mainstream social institutions. These young men and women rejected the pressure to accumulate cars, homes, and an endless array of material goods. Instead, they expressed Table 3-2 sociological perspectives on culture, tracking sociological perspectives. A desire to live in a culture based on more humanistic values, such as sharing, love, and coexistence with the environment. As a political force, this subculture opposed the United States' involvement in the war in Vietnam and encouraged draft resistance. Flax 1971, Rashid 1969. When a subculture conspicuously and deliberately opposes certain aspects of the larger culture, it is known as a counterculture. Countercultures typically thrive among young, who have the least investment in the existing culture. In most cases, a 20-year-old can adjust to new cultural standards more easily than someone who has spent 60 years following the patterns of the dominant culture. Zellner 1995. In the last decade, counterterrorism experts have become concerned about the growth of ultra-conservative militia groups in the United States. Secretive and well-armed, members of these countercultural groups tend to be anti-government, and they often tolerate racism in their midst. Watchdog's estimate that 334 militias are operating in the United States today. Southern Poverty Law Center 2013. Functionalist perspective. Conflict perspective. Feminist perspective. Interactionist perspective. Norms. Reinforce societal standards. Reinforce patterns of dominance. Reinforce roles of men and women. Low 10 to 2 culture shock. Ever stepped out the door on your first day in a foreign country and felt weak in the knees? Anyone who feels disoriented, uncertain, out of place, or even fearful when immersed in an unfamiliar culture may be experiencing culture shock. This unsettling experience may even be unusual, but visitors' cultural habits may shock members of the host culture. Imagine, for example, that you are traveling in Japan. You know that you should remove your shoes and leave them at the door when you visit someone's home. However, there are many more customs that you are unfamiliar with. During a visit with one family, as you enter the bathroom, you see several pairs of identical slippers. Thinking they are for guests, you put on a pair and rejoin your host, who reacts with horror. Unwittingly, you have worn a pair of toilet slippers into the living room. McLean 2013. From the perspective of a social worker, all of us, to some extent, take for granted the cultural practices of our society. As a result, it can be surprising and even disturbing to realize that other cultures do not follow our way of life. The fact is, customs that seem strange to us may be considered normal and proper in other cultures, which may see our social practices as odd. Resistance to technological change can lead not only to culture lag, but to some real questions of cultural survival. Low 10 degree social policy and culture. We have seen that researchers rely on a number of tools, from simple observational research to the latest in computer technologies. Because in the real world, sociological research can have far-reaching consequences for public policy and public welfare, let's consider its impact on bilingualism. Studying bilingualism. The staff in the emergency room is unprepared. Although the issue is not a medical one, the doctors and nurses do not understand the patient's complaints, nor can they communicate effectively with their companion. This type of incident, which occurs frequently, can have serious consequences. According to a study of 2 large pediatric emergency departments in Massachusetts, even when the second language is a common one like Spanish, interpreting errors can lead to clinically significant mistakes in 22% of such cases. In other words, language errors put patients at risk. Florence et al. 2012. How can we learn to work and live effectively when Americans speak so many different languages? Throughout the world, not just emergency rooms but schools and other institutions must deal with people who speak many languages. Bilingualism refers to the use of 2 languages in a particular setting, such as the workplace or schoolroom, treating each language as equally legitimate. Thus, a teacher of bilingual education may instruct children in their native language while gradually introducing them to the language of the host society. If the curriculum is also bicultural, children will learn about the mores and folkways of both the dominant culture and the subculture. To what degree should schools in the United States present the curriculum in a language other than English? This issue has prompted a great deal of debate among educators and policymakers. According to the Bureau of the Census, 61 million U.S. residents over age 5, that's about 21% of the population, spoke a language other than English as their primary language at home in 2011, figure 3 to 4. Indeed, 29 other languages are each spoken by at least 200,000 U.S. residents. See Ryan 2013. This segment of the population is expected to increase modestly by 2020. For example, the proportion of older Hispanics who speak Spanish is expected to hold steady or increase slightly. However, younger Hispanics, those under 45, will be less likely than their elders to speak Spanish. A similar trend is expected for speakers of European and Asian languages. Many elders will continue to speak a second language, while the younger generation will tend to favor English. This trend toward linguistic diversity is expected to continue into the foreseeable future. Even as the children and grandchildren of immigrants adopt English as their first language, a significant proportion of the U.S. population will continue to speak a language other than English. Portman and Shin 2011. Mapping life nationwide. Figure 3 to 4. WA4MNNH. IDSD NYWYWIMIRA. IAB New Jersey CT. CACOMO/KSKYDC. MSALGA. Applying sociology to bilingualism for a long time, people in the United States demanded conformity to a single language. This demand coincided with the functionalist view that language serves to unify members of a society. Little respect was granted to immigrants' cultural traditions. The young person would often be teased about his or her funny name, accent, or style of dress. Recent decades have seen challenges to this pattern of forced obedience to the dominant ideology. Beginning in the 1960s, active movements for Black pride and ethnic pride insisted that people regard the traditions of all racial and ethnic subcultures as legitimate and important. Conflict theorists explain this development as a case of subordinated language minorities seeking opportunities for self-expression. Partly as a result of these challenges, people began to view bilingualism as an asset. It seemed to provide a sensitive way of assisting millions of non-English speaking people in the United States to learn English in order to function more effectively within the society. The perspective of conflict theory also helps us to understand some of the attacks on bilingual programs. Many of them stem from an ethnocentric point of view, which holds 82 CHAPTERTHRE culture. That any deviation from the majority is bad. This attitude tends to be expressed by those who wish to stamp out foreign influence wherever it occurs, especially in our schools. It does not take into account that success in bilingual education may actually have beneficial results, such as decreasing the number of high school dropouts and increasing the number of Hispanics in colleges and universities. Initiating bilingual policy. Bilingualism has policy implications largely in 2 areas: efforts to maintain language purity and programs to enhance bilingual education. Nations vary dramatically in their tolerance for a variety of languages. China continues to tighten its cultural control over Tibet by extending instruction of Mandarin, the Chinese dialect, from high school into the elementary schools there, which will now be bilingual along with Tibetan. In contrast, nearby Singapore establishes English as a medium of instruction but allows students to take their mother tongue as a second language, be it Chinese, Malay, or Tamil. One bilingual hotspot is Quebec, the French-speaking province of Canada. The Québécois, as they are known, represent 83% of the province's population, but only 25% of Canada's total population. A law implemented in 1978 mandated education in French for all Quebec's children except those whose parents or siblings had learned English elsewhere in Canada. While special laws like this one have advanced French in the province, dissatisfied Québécois have tried to form their own separate country. In 1995, the people of Quebec indicated their preference of remaining united with Canada by only the narrowest of margins, 50.5%. Language and language-related cultural areas both unify and divide this nation of 33 million people. The Economist 2005 R. Schaefer 2014. Policymakers in the United States have been somewhat ambivalent in dealing with the issue of bilingualism. In 1965, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, ASEA, provided for bilingual, bicultural education. In the 1970s, the federal government took an active role in establishing a proper form for bilingual programs. However, more recently, federal policy has been less supportive of bilingualism, and local school districts have been forced to provide an increased share of funding for their bilingual programs. Yet bilingual programs are an expense that many communities and states are unwilling to pay for and are quick to cut back. In 1998, voters in California approved the proposition that all Catalonian get bilingual education. It requires instruction in English for 1.4 million children who are not fluent in the language. In the United States, repeated efforts have been made to introduce a constitutional amendment declaring English as the nation's official language. As of 2012, 31 states had declared English their official language, an action that is now more symbolic than legislative in its significance. Public concern over a potential decline in the use of English appears to be overblown. In reality, most immigrants and their offspring quickly become fluent in English and abandon their mother tongue. Nevertheless, many people are impatient with those immigrants who continue to use their mother tongue. The release in 2006 of Nuestro Himno, the Spanish language version of the Star Spangled Banner, produced a strong public reaction. 69% of those who were surveyed on the topic said the anthem should be sung only in English. In reaction against the Spanish version, at least one congressman defiantly sang the national anthem in English with incorrect lyrics. And the proprietor of a restaurant in Philadelphia posted signs advising patrons that he would accept orders for his famous steak sandwiches only in English. Throughout the year, passions ran high as policymakers debated how much support to afford people who speak other languages. J. Carroll 2006, U.S. English 2012. In the end, the immigrant's experience is not only about learning a new language. It is about learning a whole new culture and new totality of socially transmitted customs, knowledge, material objects, and behavior. Read each question carefully and
Countermeasure are subcultures that oppose culture shock. Alright, am I done? Blah, blah, blah. Alright. What's right here? Estimated an hour 38 minutes. Kill myself now, I guess. Culture. Society. Boom. Bitch. What the fuck? Woo! What the fuck? Boom! Jesus Christ. Alright, I'm done with this for now. Fuck this. Fuck this. Actually, fuck this.